to assess. Well, these companies are just buying and selling this stuff that you can't assess for $14,000 an acre. My guess is they figured out where it was, because if they don't know where it was, why would they pay $14,000 an acre? The bottom line is we know where it is, we know how to make those calculations, and we know how to do that kind of activity. Fayette County, one of the Atlas got a $1 billion line of credit on oil and gas. That was too fugacious and intangible to figure out where it was. But Bank of America figured they knew where it was, and the engineers figured they knew where it was. Everybody but the Pennsylvania tax assessor doesn't know where it is. To me, that's the other insulting thing about this whole argument. In Texas, California, Oklahoma, Alaska, California, and I keep naming all the states, the tax assessors are able to calculate a value for tax bills. But suddenly in Pennsylvania, I hear our own legislature say that Pennsylvania tax assessors aren't capable of doing this. Well, you know, I look in the back of the room and I see the tax assessor, and there's all kinds of complicated income-producing properties in this county that they do a really good job doing tax assessment on. They take their classes, they do their work, they do their homework, and they get it done. In New York State, they publish a 12-page manual on how to do it. In Ohio, they have a 10-page manual on how to do it. In Texas, they have a 4-page manual to how to do it. The tax assessors who can read, follow the manual, create the tax bill, and lo and behold, there's virtually no appeals. And the appeals are really on value, just like they are on anything else. They're not appeals on legal issues. Now, what essentially the court said was, it listed all those things, and they said, the last argument was, you can't possibly want to tax oil and gas because the property tax system is out of whack and it's not uniform, so these guys should be absolved of that. The argument I had in front of the legislature, well, then we should all be absolved. Why is oil and gas the one who gets special treatment and the rest of us don't? Now, what they essentially said was, the oil and gas estate was not, look at the words, was not land and was therefore not taxable under the statute. Essentially, the court's challenging the legislature to fix its own legislation. However, the statute which gives the counties the right to assess property has a paragraph in it called Assessment of Auxiliary Forests. And I hate reading slides, but I'm going to read this to you. All surface land which has since the 5th day of June 1913 been classified and set apart as auxiliary forest reserves shall be rated in the value for a purpose of taxation not in excess of $1. Essentially, this is like clean and green in the early days of the Commonwealth. Next line. Provided, however, that if said surface land be underlain by coal, iron ore, oil, gas, or other valuable minerals, said minerals may be assessed separately. Now, the Supreme Court said the legislature never intended them to be assessed. The statute tells them that when they give discounts, they got to make sure not to give the discounts to the minerals, which are to be separated, assessed separately. In 1910, the Supreme Court said that oil and gas minerals reserved from the grant of the surface under separate ownership should be taxed. 1910. Now they said, you know, just a mere, they tell the assessor, if you just have a deed but there's no other facts that say it has value, if I go out and just write a deed for something that has no value, you can't tax it. But if you have in the neighborhood sales of oil and gas lands, $14,000 an acre, in close enough proximity to add value, yeah, the same land here in Center County was involved in some of those sales, or any other element of value which may form a basis of evaluation, i.e. a well being drilled, production and activity going on in terms of declaring an economic interest with a permit and a well and a pipeline and a meter, should be taken into consideration by the assessor or other taxing authorities. Should always be borne in mind of real estate being a thing dealt with, that oil and gas are considered real estate, and if there be no other gas, then there is no real estate. Now, the Supreme Court in 2002 said oil and gas wasn't real estate. The Supreme Court in 1910 said tax it because it is real estate. Okay. when we do a quick and dirty look at the market value of the land using just those sales and existing property, existing well operations, we're looking at probably $46 billion worth of market value in the state. It could be much higher than that. And this is how it spreads out across the state. Red are $2 to $3 billion of real estate or oil and gas in the county. Center County is in less than $1 billion currently in real estate. Drilling hasn't happened here. The activity hasn't happened here as much as it has in other counties. If I look at Center County specifically, we look at the activity is basically, basically north of Route 80, up in Burnside, Snowshoe, Phillipsburg area, in the school district that Dad represents. There are 800 to 900 wells. There are 224,000 acres of Marcellus shale. There are 800 active wells. There are currently more than 2 Marcellus wells active. There's a potential in this many acres of Marcellus to develop 1,400 to 2,500 new wells, the working interest of which, when it's first opened, is probably worth about $3 to $4 million. Development will take anywhere from 10 to 30 years at their current rates of production and where the pipelines are. So, Center County values, we're looking at existing shallow wells that are worth $30 to $60 million right now that were taken off the tax rolls in 2002. We're looking at Marcellus acreage probably running between $3,000 and $15,000 an acre. Based on the comparative sales, that acreage is probably worth between $100 and $500 million. If we look at the wells that are currently permitted and likely to be drilled, we're looking at another $250 to $500 million worth of taxable market value of the taxable real estate if the Supreme Court had not overturned 100 years worth of taxation. Now, I didn't give you the formulas to calculate the value of the well because I don't want to go into, I teach that class, I don't want to go into all the nuances. But essentially, with the way the value of the well is created is we look at the income flow, the net operating income flow over the projected life of the well. No different than looking at the income flow from an apartment house and those kind of things. We look at the net operating rent. That information is available well, they have to report it to their stockholders in their SEC documents. But that information is available. Essentially what we do is we calculate what the present worth of that future income is. So we say, if I owe you $1 today and I give you the $1 today, we're square. If I owe you $1 but I don't pay it for 10 more years, you're going to say, geez, I got to wait 10 years for the buck? Give me something less now. 50 cents, give me 25 cents. And we can calculate that mathematically. It's like putting the money in a savings account and saying it grows 2% every year. I know in 10 years it's going to be worth $1.20. I can do that math. Do the math backwards and we say what it would be worth today. Essentially, that's how the present worth is calculated on a gas well operation once it's in production. It's no different than the present worth being calculated by the county assessor on many other income-producing properties. The difference is you got to have the data. So the law, I've participated 2 or 3 times in writing different versions of the law that we would like to get passed for taxation. And essentially the law says you got to supply us gross income, net income, and you got to supply us your decline. Remember the decline? You got to supply us where you're at on that curve in terms of your gas so we can make a mathematical model, which is no different than we did in 2001 with the existing wells. And I got to tell you, in 2001 we had maybe 5 or 6 appeals. Most of them were settled informally as soon as we got good data. Because once the formula is built, it's no different than the formula that the gas companies are using when they report to the SEC. The SEC and the IRS have really stringent requirements on how they report. And what we do when we work those numbers for the county was we follow those guidelines, the same guidelines they do, which kept everybody out of court because you simply said, I'm just using this way you report to everybody else, and that's our calculation value. The only thing that becomes an argument is what's the discount rate. Well, we can argue about that. Is it 10% or 15% or 5%? And there's ways of calculating that. And again, your county assessor does that every year. He calculates that every year for other kinds of property. So we're not talking anything that cannot be done by the county itself. Or in our case, we would do it with you, as that contract continues. But many counties could continue to do this operation with or without some level of assistance.
Rich, I want to ask you questions first.
I think it's a lot of good information. I'm going to
yield my time to the media to ask the folks questions, because in essence, they need to get back to their work, so.
Steve, anything?
I would agree. It's like a shotgun effective. Both you and Dan presented a pretty compelling argument for taxation. The other calculations are just almost staggering, and you see the number of well possibilities in the state, and literally billions of dollars that this involves. And I think it's something that needs to have a real hard look, both at the local level, and I'm sure it impacts the school districts. But I'm sure the state really needs to look at this, because this is huge. This isn't as you say, the play is extreme here, and it's not.
Right.
And
I wonder.
I don't even know where you start to defend it. I mean, obviously, in 2001, this was calculated, and school districts and local municipalities gained revenue from it, and we know we have the impact. So, I think it's worthy of the discussion. But
One thing I wanted to add to that, both Morningstar and Standard & Poor's, which report on stocks and so forth, they have if you go to Standard & Poor's and ask for, and I'll tell this to the media as well, go and get Standard & Poor's and ask for a report called Marcellus Shale Play. It's about a 60-page report done by the financial people who rate companies for people buying stock, Standard & Poor's and Morningstar. About page 22, 26 of the report, the headline is, in Pennsylvania they don't have severance tax or property tax. The next line is, the Morningstar people and the Standard & Poor's people make the following statement. They do not think it would have a major effect on the viability of any of the companies currently operating, and it would not change the rate of production in Pennsylvania. The bottom line is, the tax, as a property tax, would probably be less than 1% of the annual net operating income when you calculate it out. When you're making a return on investment of between 10 and 25%, the loss of 1% in a net operating income does not stop anybody from drilling a well. It obviously hasn't stopped them from drilling wells in Oklahoma, Texas, West Virginia, and other places. So this argument that this tax will stop people from drilling just doesn't make sense. And even the industry's own raters, its own evaluators for stock purposes, say the same thing.
Dan, Jeff, I understand that what it takes to amend our existing assessment legislation to restore this tax is the addition of 4 words, and oil and gas?
Yes.
That's correct, and also the legislation that would make sure that municipalities such as school districts did not receive a windfall. Like I said before, House Bill 10 does that. I really don't think there's much time, and I'm not asking for a decision today, but there's not much time for the Center County to sit on the sidelines, because I think something is going to happen soon, particularly with the budget problems that we hear about in Harrisburg. And I think for us to say, well, we're going to continue to be frozen out, which is how we've been for essentially 8 years. And we've been frozen out because we have sat on the sidelines. And I'm hopeful, because we're in this together, municipalities, school districts, counties, I'm hopeful that Center County will take the action, what action they can, to try to join. And it's going to take a groundswell of effort, because in that area that doesn't have Marcellus Shale in this state, and you saw it from the diagram, it has a lot of representation in Harrisburg. It's going to take all of us acting collectively, acting together to make that happen. And I'm hopeful that our county, Center County, will be part of that effort.
It would be like if all of a sudden all the other income approach valuation, hotels, restaurants, shopping centers, became a state tax, and the money was divided up in Harrisburg, and most of it would go to the part of the state that's not here. And that's the fear that Dan and I have tried to express as we've talked to people, is if this tax is done as a severance tax alone in Harrisburg,